And good day, everyone. I'm your host for today's webinar, Mike Wasecki, Engaging with Legislators, brought to you by the American Association of Community Colleges. Thank you for joining today. The webinar will be recorded. And now it's my pleasure to turn over today's event to our moderator, Ellen House. Ellen is the Program Director for Academic and Student Affairs at the American Association of Community Colleges. Welcome, Ellen. Go ahead. The webinar is yours.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. On behalf of AACC, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. And we thank you for being willing to learn more about engaging with legislators and for your important advocacy for community colleges and the ATE program. As you're aware, since the ATE conference ends on a Wednesday this year instead of a Friday, it gives us the opportunity to help interested conference participants plan visits to engage with their legislators to share the significant impact of community colleges and the ATE program on preparing STEM technicians for the workforce. And it's our hope that this webinar will help to provide you with some insights and guidance on some effective techniques for communicating and arranging for visits with congressional members and their staff, as well as some messaging points regarding ATE and STEM. So as Mike indicated, at any point throughout the webinar, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box. We encourage you to ask questions, and we'll be breaking periodically to address them. So to get started, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's webinar and my good colleague, Jim Hermes. Jim is AACC's Associate Vice President for Government Relations, and I thank you, Jim, for leading this webinar today, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Ellen, and I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about being an effective advocate for ATE and STEM programs at community colleges. And just a little bit about me. I have been here at AACC for 17 plus years now. And for the whole time I've been here, part of my legislative portfolio, which focuses a lot on workforce development, although all of us here at AACC in the advocacy shop work on all the issues that comprise our legislative agenda. But part of my focus has been on workforce development. That's included, as well as the NSF and science and the ATE program, and in particular funding for the ATE program. That's not been one of my harder assignments over the years. It's always a program that's enjoyed strong congressional support and continues to do so, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. As Ellen mentioned, what we want to do today, because of the different timing of the ATE conference, is just talk a little bit about, and I really urge you to take that opportunity that the new timing of the conference gives you to get up and talk to your legislators and their staffs on Capitol Hill, something I'm sure many of you are already engaged in, along with colleagues at your campus, and some of you may not be already engaged in that practice, and this presents a great opportunity to get into that and to let them know about what exactly you're doing and the great impact you're having for your students and your communities. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, basically it's broken down into two main categories. We're going to talk some about the process of arranging and conducting and following up a meeting with your congressional representatives here in Washington. And that includes three basic phases, as you can see here on the slide. Before you go, basically the preparation, what you should do beforehand. That's kind of the phase that you're in right now in terms of the couple of months now before the ATE conference. While in Washington, what do you want to do while you're here, conducting the meeting itself in particular, and then follow-up activities after you return home that you want to engage in to be as effective as possible. And then we're going to talk a little bit after all that in terms of more substance, in particular where Congress is now in terms of the funding, their annual funding process, the appropriations process, and how the ATE program fits into all that. And a couple of the points that you want to make sure that you mention in terms of supporting the ATE program and STEM education in general at community colleges while you're having that meeting. So why don't we get underway? So the first day, as I mentioned, before you go, and this is the time now or coming up, soon, maybe a little bit early at this point, but you want to start thinking about now about arranging meetings with your representatives and senators and their staff members. And it most likely will be, of course, the staff members that you meet with, and that presents a great opportunity. While it's always great to have meetings with the members themselves, most of the work that we do here at AACC is with the staff of the members, and really they are the ones that are have their feet on the ground and are really the ones that are helping the member or the senator really shape their policy and their approach to topics in this area. So they are very important people to talk to. So you want to arrange a arrange a meeting with a staff member. What do you do? Well, you want to get in touch with them by email or telephone. If you're starting really at square one and not even quite aware of who your representative in Congress is, you can get to that information, of course, on the internet and looking that information up and determining who your member is first, and then giving that office a call and arranging a member with the relevant staff member. So a couple of words about that. One thing to stress at the outset, before thinking about any of this and jumping in to the process, is to really ensure that you are coordinating what you are doing with a person or persons or people on your campus that are primarily responsible for federal advocacy, if that doesn't happen to be you, which I think in most cases it probably is not. So if you have a government relations officer, as some community colleges, well, certainly not all do, who does handle federal advocacy, and/or a lot of times it's the president of the college themselves, you want to make sure that when you are going up to meet with that congressional office, that those other people are aware of that, and that any other messages that you want to make sure to impart to that congressional member and his or her staff are coordinated between all of you. So we always do stress that need for coordination on an intra-campus level. So, and of course, obviously, if you do have people on your campus that are very engaged in federal advocacy, they're also going to be able to help you with a lot of this process, including telling you exactly who to try to arrange a meeting with. But some of you may not, so we'll go through some of that process in case you're doing that more on your own. So you want to email or call any staff members. Certainly, if you already have a relationship with someone, that's probably the person you want to reach out to first and see if you can meet with them when you're here in Washington. If you don't have such a contact, you just want to call the office. And it says here to ask which Stanford handles higher education issues. This is from material that we use in a number of different contexts. I think in terms of talking to someone about the ATE program, it very well may be the staffer that handles science issues. Congressional offices have a number of staffers. Senate offices tend to have more, and representatives a little bit less. But basically, they're broken down into staffers, many of whom are called legislative assistants, that have portfolio areas that they cover, substantive areas of legislation that they cover for their bosses. So you're going to want to arrange this meeting most likely with the one that covers science, and that could very well be the person that also covers higher education and education issues in general. But in some cases, it might be a different person. It's also possible that you might want to meet with staffers of key committees outside of your members' offices while you're here in town. And of course, for the ATE program, really the key committee in terms of being the authorizing committee, the committee that writes science and education policy, are the science committees in the House and the Senate. And then there are also funding committees as well, the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Committee. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Obviously, the internet is there to determine the information in terms of how to contact the office. You can also just call the main Capitol switchboard and just ask for the office that you are trying to reach. That number is 202-224-3121. And again, it's just a matter of really identifying, if you don't know already, who the appropriate staffer is to talk with this issue about, and then reaching that person and arranging a meeting. And that's really a simple, pretty informal process when you're talking about meeting with a staffer. It's really just a matter of directly contacting them, and saying, hey, I'm going to be in town. I'd love to come up and talk with you about the ATE program and things that we're doing there. Do you have any time on, such and such date? And if you're a constituent, I think they will do their utmost to make that time for you. Obviously, if things are a little bit more complex, if you're talking about meeting with the senator or the representative themselves, that is usually handled through the scheduler for the office. So if you are interested in doing that, you'll want to reach out first to the scheduler for that particular office, and they will handle trying to arrange a meeting with a member. But again, for staff level meetings, that extra level is not really necessary in terms of, almost all the time, in terms of working through a different scheduler. The other really important thing to do before you go is to gather up some pertinent information about the impact of these programs on your campuses. And of course, in this context, that's going to be primarily the ATE program. But I'd also urge you to think, a little bit more broadly, and also think about the other programs that may, in fact, intertwine with the ATE program in support of the projects and the activities on your campus. Things such as the Perkins Career and Technical Education Program, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and the programs that are funded through that, the Workforce Development and Training Programs. Student aid, obviously, is very important to all these programs, the program in particular, in terms of supporting students that are enrolled in your programs on your campuses. But again, the main focus is obviously going to be ATE and what you're doing in your projects or your centers, and relaying that information to your members of Congress and their staff people. All politics is local, as it says here, and they're going to want, your legislators and your staffs are really going to want to hear how their constituent institutions are affected by federal policies. And you're going to want to have really a mixture of data, to the extent that you have it, about the impact of your program, and as well as stories, and in particular stories about particular students. I really think that mixture of information is the most effective tool in terms of getting at the dual desires that staffers will most likely have. They're going to want to have that hard information. They're going to want to have those numbers about what, how in particular are the federal funds that are provided to the ATE program and those other programs that I mentioned, how are they having a measurable impact at institutions, in their communities, and on the students that are served by those institutions. But they're also, these are all people too, and they're going to be very responsive to really great anecdotal information and stories about, the students in the programs. And like I say here, it's even more useful to boil it down to specific students and say, John or Mary was, this is a student, and give their background and how the program helped them, and where they're headed, what they hope to do after leaving the program, or students who have already completed the program and what they're doing now, and how they might be working in the community, and all those great outcomes that you have out of your ATE-funded projects and centers. So that's the information that you're really going to want to focus on getting together before you even come to Washington and conducting those meetings. The other thing you really want to do in this phase of the process, that before you go phase, is make sure that you familiarize yourself with your legislator to the extent that you're not already. Knowing things such as their personal background, what issues that they focus on, the committees they serve on, and of course their general political leanings. You're not necessarily going to want to directly address all those things during your meeting, but of course these are all good things just to know as background and possibly ways to shape some of the things that you say during the course of your meeting. I would say in a meeting such as the ones that you would be most likely having, which are very likely, largely educational about the programs that that you're engaged in on your campuses, and like I said, the impacts in the communities. That's not going to require a whole bunch of shaping the message for a particular audience, but you're still going to want to know all that background information, and of course, one of the best places to start to get all that information is just the website of the member of Congress themselves. And we have, you see the picture here of the top of David Price's website. David Price being the House member back over 20 years ago now, who was really known as the father of the ATE program. He's still a member of Congress and still very engaged in advocating on behalf of the ATE program. So I thought that would be an appropriate member to just show an example at the top of their web page. Why don't we stop here? We got a few questions already about this part of the process before we get into conducting the meeting itself. So the first question is, is it worth having some students come along to a meeting like this? Absolutely. We find that in the position that I'm in and the work that we do here at AACC, we're not often in a position to directly involve students in our advocacy, which is in some ways a shame, because they do prove to be very effective in terms of getting the message across, in terms of, I was talking just a minute ago about having stories about particular students, but obviously if you can have that student there themselves and they can present themselves well and tell their own story well, that's even better. So I know that there are a lot of students, obviously, that are at the conference, and involving them in these meetings is a great idea. I would just say that in terms of that, it would be good to go over the information that we're going over today with them and kind of structure it a little bit, as we're going to talk about in a minute. These meetings do need a little bit in the way of structure and preparation, but absolutely involving students is a great idea. The other question is, how much lead time do you need to set up a meeting like this? I would say it's definitely not too early now. If you want to start even this week and say and call your member's office and arrange a meeting, that's fine. It doesn't need to be this far ahead of time. It could even be, like a lot of times for us here in town and working with the Congress, we'll probably arrange meetings like a week or two ahead of time. But even a lot of times they happen on shorter notice than that. But that's a little bit of a different story because we're here. So you want to do a little bit more lead time for the situation that you're in, most of you, that you're coming in from out of town and you're really only here on you really only have a given day or afternoon where you can do the meeting. So like I said, it's not too early now. It is the August recess, so it might be the case where it might be a little bit harder to reach a staffer. So maybe even, but I wouldn't hesitate to try, but you might need to call back again at a later time. And of course, everyone will be back in town, and Congress will be back up and running the day after Labor Day. So if you have a hard time reaching someone now, that's a good time to give it another try, and that would be plenty early to arrange a meeting. Can you take photos during the meeting? Things that you get, yeah, I mean, I would ask permission first, especially if the member of Congress is involved in the meeting, him or herself. But obviously ask, and but I think for the most part, people would be plenty comfortable with that. Sometimes there's issues of staffers not being out in front, and it needs to be all about the members, and there's they're the image that they want to be, that the office wants to be out there. So that's the reason why you might want to ask, but I think that that's not a bad idea at all. The phone number that I'll mention that phone number again in terms of if you're having trouble finding, and we do have a tool on our website. It does, I hesitate to mention it because it doesn't seem particularly functional at the moment, but we're in the process of getting it fixed. But there are plenty of other tools out there on the internet in terms of finding the phone number for your congressional member's office. But as I mentioned before, you can also just call the Congressional switchboard, and that number is 202-224-3121, and just say, I want to please connect me with so-and-so's office, and they'll get you right over there. And yes, thank you, Randy. You asked a great question. The final point I want to make about this phase of the process before you go, and any of the other phases that we here at AACC, our staff, and you'll see our contact information on the last slide, and we'll keep it up there so you can get all the information. We're always here and available to help you set up any of these meetings that you need help with as well. So let's talk a little bit now about the meeting itself. Let me just preface this by saying a lot of this is not rocket science. It's not particular to the field of congressional advocacy. These are things that you are applying every day in meetings that you attend. There are a couple of maybe particular pointers, and I'll mention those as we go along. But a lot of this is really just basically the way you want to conduct yourself in any given meeting. So obviously you want to be on time, flexible, friendly, and brief. So let me talk about that a little bit, and the second point at the same time. Meetings with staff can be as productive as seeing the member personally. Like I said, most likely the staff is going to be the person that you are going to meet while you're here in Washington. Some of you may have meetings with the members themselves, but mostly the staff. I outlined all the reasons why meeting with the staff is very important, and especially the ones here in Washington who may very well be different than the people that you've gotten to meet back at home. Members have district offices, obviously, with staff that work there, so there's a combination. So the opportunity to meet the Washington-based staff is a good one while you're here in town. So a little bit more in general about congressional meetings and how they may be a little bit different than other meetings. The point about them being brief is one that is pretty pertinent here. I would say most of the meetings that I go to as an advocate probably last somewhere in the half-an-hour range. Sometimes you have one longer, and it just totally depends on how open the staffer's schedule is, obviously how interested they are in the topic at hand, any number of things. But half an hour, in terms of planning, in terms of making your preparations for the meeting and determining how long it might be, I would say half an hour is probably a good length of time to plan for. That being said, any number of things can cause the meeting to run even shorter than that. Things are very busy up on the Hill. They will be busy at the time that you're here. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But any number of things can lead to a meeting that's very compressed time-wise. 10, 15 minutes is certainly not out of the realm of possibility. And so you do have to be essentially ready for that. Have your, what's your quote-unquote your elevator speech ready to go, your shortened version of what you want to say ready to go in case you don't have that half an hour or even or more available to meet with the staffer. And that's that's the point we're trying to get out here in terms of being flexible. Be flexible first, be flexible first with how you might modify the timing of what you're going to say. Obviously, you want to be friendly. That's pretty obvious. And the other thing I think to mention, just in terms about meeting with staff, especially over on the House side, a couple things. One is just be prepared, mentally for the fact that the staffer you're going to meet with, again, particularly on the House side, is most likely going to be a pretty young individual. A lot of staffers there are, mid-20-something, right around there. And I think it's important to keep in mind that a congressional staffer of that age really oftentimes has a lot more responsibility than many other people in the workforce that are that age. So don't in any way feel that you've been sort of put off or shunted off to someone with lesser responsibility if the person you're meeting with is, and when you're getting up to somewhere around my age, they seem younger all the time if the person is younger than you anticipated. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is, and again, this comment especially applies on the House side where space is more limited. The other way that you need to be flexible is literally in terms of the physical space that you might be meeting in. I've had meetings that are in the hallways. I've had meetings that are, a lot of meetings that are just right on the couch out in the main kind of receiving office of the office area. House staffers, in particular, they have desks back in, in a room with many staffers' desks. So you might meet at a small table back in that room, but they don't have their own offices. And for a lot of the House offices, they don't really have dedicated meeting space. Things are different over in the Senate. Senate offices are bigger. They have more space. A typical Senate office has one or even more, small conference rooms. So that would be more likely would be your physical setting for your meeting over on the Senate side. But again, even on the Senate side, you may find yourself meeting in a place that is sort of, might be a little bit unfamiliar to you in terms of, where you normally have a meeting. And I think the point here on the slide about, keeping the meeting, not overstaying your welcome, is an important one as well. Obviously you want to thoroughly get across your message and the points you want to make, but you also want to follow the lead and the cues that you're getting from your staffer. If they are very engaged and the conversation is free-flowing, going past that half-hour mark is fine. But don't feel that if you've had a relatively concise meeting and you've kind of gotten all the points gone across and you're not necessarily getting any strong cues that the staffer wants to keep things going, that don't feel that you have to get to any sort of set amount of time to make it worthwhile, and just go ahead and say thank you very much, and obviously offer to to follow up in any way that the staffer wants to do, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Another thing, sort of along the same lines, in terms of not overdoing it. You don't want to. Not only do you not want to overdo it in terms of time, you also don't want to overdo it in the materials that you bring to the meeting for the staffer. Really, what you want to do is put together something that's about a page, maybe on both sides of the page, information about the program. Have further information with you. Here again, you're following the cues of the person that you're meeting with. So you want to present them that very concise information, work off of that during your meeting if possible, and say, or even provide it to them before the meeting so they get a chance, if possible, to look at it. But start with something very concise, and of course offer to provide more information if they are interested, and have that with you if possible. The other point here is, the general point being, of course, these are extremely busy individuals, and they don't necessarily have the chance to read even as much as about things as they would themselves like, and they don't. So they don't, they're not really amenable to just kind of being piled upon with paper. A lot of times they're going to ask you, thanks for this paper. Please send it to me electronically if you haven't already done that before the meeting. We're seeing that more and more. Obviously, people want to have their files done digitally now rather than on paper. And then, like we said, always make sure you follow up with additional material that they've requested, at their offer. Again, a lot of this is common sense, but it is important. I think especially important in terms of congressional meetings that you resist any urge you might have to sort of give them anything and everything about your program. As I know, and rightfully so, you're all extremely proud of the work that is going on with your ATE programs and are very eager to share it. You just have to do it in a concise manner and work off of what what the staffer seems interested in receiving. And then finally, I think a couple more brief points about while you're here in Washington. Obviously, any meeting is most effective when it's a two-way conversation. And as with any good relationship, it's important to have that give and take. So not only do you want to plan on imparting the information about that you want to get across, but you want to make sure that you specifically ask about the members' priorities, either to them if they're present in the meeting, or to their staff. What are their top issues? What is their focus? Some of that you're already going to know from that preparation that you did beforehand, but you still want to ask, and you want to hopefully get into a conversation about how this may fit in with their priorities. And like we said here on the slide, the discussion, that may yield opportunities to work together on additional issues beyond even the main reason that you're there to meet in the first place. And then finally, do go ahead and collect the contact information. Still primarily done via business card. That's exactly what they're going to look like in that picture right there. Obviously, then you'll have an easy reminder then of who exactly you met with in the office, which is very helpful in the eventuality that you meet, in multiple places. Keep everyone straight and know where to reach back out to in terms of thanking them for the meeting, and the other things that we're going to talk about in a minute in terms of after you return home after your meeting. Okay, let's stop here before we go on to the next phase, the after returning home phase, and see what we have in terms of questions. Candace asked the question: with our limited time, should we focus on our state legislators on a broad base of representatives? With your limited time, you should definitely focus on your representatives in Congress. You're their constituent. That's your most important one. It's important even if they don't necessarily plug directly through their work into these issues. Obviously, people on the committees that are most involved in these things are going to be the ones up on the Hill that are most plugged into STEM education. People on the science committee that I mentioned before. So that's why it's very important to know which committees beforehand that your legislator sits on in terms of the material that you're going to want to know about them before you come. But even for those that aren't, the most plugged into it by their committee work, obviously they're going to be interested of the impact on their community of the things that are happening through your projects and centers. So that's always going to be your first stop in terms of going to see them, and they'll feed, even like I said, if they don't work directly a lot on these issues, on authorizing or funding, they're going to be in touch with other members of Congress who may sit in that position. So always start with your members. Now, and as I mentioned before, if you have other time, I think probably the next priority might be a little bit tougher meeting to get if you're not a constituent. But I think the next priority would be to try to reach out to the relevant members of the science committee staffs in the House and the Senate, and also potentially the appropriations subcommittees. And we'll talk about that structure in a minute. But I would say that would be the next choice. So start with your own members. The other member, another question, is it appropriate or acceptable to ask for a tour of the White House as long as we are in the area? That's not something you're going to want to do during your meeting. I think I would just leave that all up to you. Yeah, I don't even honestly don't know all the process for doing that. I mean, the White House has its own visitor center that you go to, and I think you arrange the tours, but I think that can also be done through your member's office. And you're a constituent of that member, yeah, I wouldn't see why not. But again, I would keep that separate from the meeting itself. I wouldn't. The offices are going to have different people that deal with that sort of thing, and it's not going to be the staffer that you meet with. I'm sure they'd be happy to refer you to the right person, but I would do that on the phone in a kind of a separate process, and don't ask for that during your meeting. Should we or could we invite someone from AACC to come along? That's a great question. We do that from time to time. We do that especially when we have meetings in town like the ATE conference. We are always very happy to do that. My take on that is that your member is going to be most interested in talking to you, and personally when I'm in a meeting such as that with a constituent and their member of Congress, I tend not to say very much. I just go there to be a resource if needed, to answer any questions that maybe maybe you might not know in terms of where things stand legislatively and so forth. But they're going to be most interested in hearing from you. So I would suggest even asking, after you set up the meeting, asking if they, if you were inclined to have one of us go with you on your meeting. I would ask them if they minded. Occasionally, you run into an office that says, we want to meet with you, our constituent. We're not, during this time anyway, we don't want to meet the DC person right now. I mean, we don't generally have a problem accessing members' offices, but sometimes they don't really want to mix the two things. Yeah, that's probably not something you'd run into too often, but I would still ask the question anyway. But should the answer be, yeah, sure, bring them along, we're happy to come along. And like I said, at least speaking for me personally, I do tend not to, I just tend to be kind of there as a question answerer, and rather than injecting myself, into the conversation. That should really be between the member staff and their constituent. Okay, let us move and talk on about the next. Whoop! Oh, we're already there. Let's go back a slide. After you get back, so you've come to town, you gathered all your information beforehand, you really educated yourself, then you came into town, you had a great meeting with your member of Congress or his or her staff person. What to do after that? Well, obviously you don't want this just to be a one-shot thing. You really want this meeting to be either a continuation of a relationship that you've already established or the start of a new relationship. And in either case, you want this meeting just to be one point of contact between you and this person that you have this relationship with now. So what does that entail? First of all, you want to thank them for taking the time to meet with you, after you get back home. Within a couple of days after the meeting would be ideal for that. And then follow up at that time with any information that you talked about at the meeting that you said, oh, I'll get that to you, that maybe you didn't have right with you, or if they, like we said before, a lot of times they're going to say, oh, that's great to have this on paper. Could you also get this to me by email, in a digital copy? So send them any of that information that you talked about the meeting, along with a thank you within a couple of days of getting back. And then after that, you want to maintain that relationship. You want to, when something comes up about the project or whatever it is you discussed in your meeting, there's a new development, new results, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that you communicate with this person about that. Say, hey, following up on our conversation of a couple months ago, you might be interested to see maybe there's a news story about it. Chances are they would have seen that in their local media, but maybe not. So you want to forward to them. It's just anything that provides essentially a good hook to communicate with that person again. I mean, it's certainly acceptable just to sort of generally check in and say, hi, I just wanted to check in with you, anything that we should know about back here. But it's even more useful to to have a sort of something concrete to communicate with them and say, all right, this is hey, this just happened, wanted to make sure that you knew about it, etc. Now, again, as with anything, any kind of relationships like this that you establish, you don't want to underdo it, because then you sort of, that relationship kind of withers away. You also don't want to overdo it. You don't want to be sending someone something every couple of days. Again, going back to what we talked about, these are extremely busy individuals. They're going to be as accommodating as possible to you as a constituent, but even in that scenario, you can overdo it in terms of in terms of your follow-up, in terms of what you're sending them. And then this last point on the slide is also very important. So you're going to want to take any opportunity that you can to get that member and or that staff person that you met with back on your campus for a visit. Right now, this is actually a great time for that. Right now, Congress is on the front end of a month-long recess, so they're all home right now in their home districts or states, and they're engaged in all kinds of activities to communicate with their constituents. So August is a great time. Maybe not so much on your institutions because things are a lot quieter during the summer, but in terms of their schedule, it's a good time to maybe have them by. Now, if you want to do something while things are more kind of up and running in the fall on your campuses, and to the extent if they are not now, that's fine. That's perfectly understandable. But just so you know, Congress is off right now. They're not here. They're back there until after Labor Day. But if now's not a good time, I think it's just kind of keeping generally aware of, members tend to be home for long weekends most of the time, and also they have periodic breaks. Every couple weeks or month or so, they'll be home for at least a few days. So keep generally aware of that. Those tend to happen at, around close to holidays and things of that nature. Those are good times as well to try to arrange a visit of a member of Congress to your campus and really show, and again, and that gives you the opportunity potentially to do things that you couldn't do here in Washington. Obviously, you couldn't bring the visuals and the actual experience of visiting and seeing firsthand the activities that are taking place in terms of your project, your center, back on your campus or at your center. We also talked about students before. There are going to be a lot of students here for the conference, and we talked about involving them in these meetings up on the Hill. But to the extent that that wasn't possible back here in D.C., obviously you're going to have students there on campus, to participate in this activity, whatever activity you put together. That's another great opportunity to do that. And of course, the other one is the opportunity to involve the media. And really, when I say the media, of course, I mean not only your local press, but your social media outlets through your campus. These are members of Congress, after all. They don't mind the opportunity to get some good press, and that of course is going to extend to better feelings about your institution. So important things to do then about after you return home. So that's really what I put together today in terms of the process of meeting with your members of Congress while you're here for the conference in October. Again, as I mentioned at the outset, a lot of this is not specialized knowledge by any stretch of the imagination. It really is extending how you conduct yourselves in any given work relationship or work activity, and applying those same principles to meeting with your members and their staff. But again, there are some particularities, and we've covered a bunch of those, and hopefully you feel a little bit better about how to engage in that process and what to do while you're here and all that. But to the extent that you still have questions, obviously please ask them now. But we're always here to help you out with that process and possibly even participate in the meetings themselves as we discuss them. So we're going to get into the substance in just a second of the ATE program, its funding and its legislative status, and some of the particular things to say in these meetings. But why don't we stop here again and see what additional questions have come in through the chat. Looks like we just got the one additional. Nope, we don't have any more questions. Okay, so we're going to move along. Right now, as I mentioned, I'm just going to go over a little bit of background in terms of where we are things in general in Congress, and the implications that has for the ATE program in particular, and STEM education a little bit more broadly. I do this not by way of saying that these are things you're really going to have to know really well when you have your meetings with your members and their staff. They're not going to expect you to be experts in the legislative process, how things work, where everything goes, and all that. But some of this is just kind of good general information to have in the back of your minds to kind of get a better sense of the context that they are working in to try to do what's right for your institution and for your program. So let's talk about funding then. The federal fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. So we are in the latter stages of the federal fiscal year. You're probably aware of this through, reading in the press about, how Congress is coming up fairly soon to the point where they're going to have to make a lot of decisions and keep the lights on, basically, get the federal government running past that September 30th date. And as I mentioned, they're not actually going to be in session again until after Labor Day. So, long way of saying, most likely, the scenario that you would find yourselves in in October, probably more probable than not, is each year what tends to be the case is Congress comes up to that September 30th date. They haven't passed the full funding legislation that funds all the departments, including the NSF, and they have to pass essentially a temporary measure, something called a continuing resolution, just to keep the government open. Those tend to last, well, in recent years, those have lasted several months into the fiscal year. Just this past year, because we had a new incoming administration, we actually didn't pass final funding legislation until about halfway into the fiscal year, just this past spring. So, it's possible that the funding for this coming fiscal year, which is fiscal year 18, will have been settled by the time that you're here for the conference, but it's not at all likely. So more likely than not, the status again will be the government will be running on this continuing resolution, and final funding decisions for the fiscal year 18 will not yet have been made or enacted into law. So very long way of saying that when you're up here and you're meeting with your member of Congress, those decisions still have to be made, and there will still be, and it will be a good time, to make the case for ATE funding. And let's talk about that a little bit. Just mechanically, how ATE funding works, first of all. The National Science Foundation is funded through the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill. There are 12 appropriations bills funding the various agencies and other facets of the federal government. Theoretically, they each get considered and passed individually and signed by the President. I don't remember if that has ever happened during the time I've been a congressional advocate, but it certainly has not happened in many years. What does tend to happen is that they can't reach agreement on all parts of these bills, and at some point they all get rolled into, maybe not all, but most or all get rolled into a very large funding bill, which passes sometime into the fiscal year. And that, like we just talked about, that will most likely be the case when you're up there in October. ATE funding is contained within the. Well, let me back up one step. So if you read through that Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill, you wouldn't find anything in there that said anything about ATE funding. It is not a line item itself in the bill. How ATE funding done is that it is one of several programs run under the, and I think most of you know this, run under the Education and Human Resources Directorate at the NSF. And then the way that Congress tends to provide direct input on ATE funding itself is not in the bill, as I just said, but they do often have language in the committee report that accompanies the appropriations bill. There's language oftentimes in that report which says, this is how we want you to fund, how we want you, NSF, to fund ATE. So it's in that report, really, not in the bill itself, that provides you with the pertinent information about what Congress wants NSF to do in terms of funding. Now, this is not, it being report language, this doesn't have quite the force of law. It's not quite the same as having a line item in the bill itself saying ATE is funded at this amount for the coming fiscal year, but at the same time, NSF is not going to likely go against the wishes of their funding committees as expressed in the language in the committee report. So it is almost as good to have that language in the report and provide, saying exactly what the committees want the funding to be for ATE. So what's happening this year so far? I think many of you might have seen the message earlier regarding what the administration requested for ATE, as with many programs in the Trump administration budget, which they put out in full, I believe it was early June. ATE funding was proposed to be cut in that budget. Currently, for the last few years, the ATE program has been funded at $66 million total. The administration's budget proposed reducing that funding by $7 million to $59 million. Obviously, that would be a cut of significant magnitude should it ever occur, and we're, at AACC certainly would be strongly opposed to a cut of that nature. That's the bad news. The good news is that both the House and Science, Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations subcommittees, and actually the full committees, appropriations committees, have already approved legislation, the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Appropriations bills. And in both of those instances, those reports that I mentioned, both the House report and the Senate report, have language in them saying basically that we want the NSF should fund the ATE program at least the same level that it was funded at last year, right about $66 million. So that's good because while in the House bill, as it says here, Education and Human Resources Director, which is the line item in the bill that is most relevant to ATE, that was funded at $880 million in the House bill, which is what it got last year. So basically, the House kept funding for EHR level at $880 million. They ignored the administration's request for a lower amount of funding. I don't know off the top of my head what the request for EHR overall was from the administration, but the House ignored it, said, no, we're going to fund EHR at $880 million. They funded NSF at a little bit less than last year overall, but the EHR was level. And again, they had that report language saying that ATE should be funded at least the same level as it was last year. And they basically provided the money to do that. Now the Senate, in their bill, they did take a little bit of a cut out of education and human resources. Again, not as much as the Trump administration has proposed, but a little shave of $18 million. So in their bill, EHR would be funded at $862 million. But they still do have that language, saying ATE needs to be funded at the same level at least as last year. So in that scenario, should that happen at the end of the day where EHR goes down overall, but there's language saying ATE needs to be funded at the same level as last year, that portends a scenario where perhaps the NSF has to make choices of cutting other programs within the directorate if they don't have the full funding to do everything that they want to do, or to do everything at the same level as last year. Let me back up one step here and mention another thing that is important and is important for you to know about this general funding process this year. So right now, Congress they're working through these appropriations bills. As I mentioned, the bill that NSF is funded by has passed both the committees. It hasn't passed either the full House or the full Senate yet. There is talk that the House is going to do so shortly after they return from their congressional recess, along with the rest of the appropriations bills they haven't done yet. But what is happening is that these bills are being that there is there's an overall amount of money that these appropriations subcommittees are given to work with, and those amounts of money are key to budget caps that are in place under law, under something called the Budget Control Act. I know I sound like I'm getting a little weedy here, but it's just kind of important to get sort of the general sense of this. So the Budget Control Act, which was passed several years ago, also known as the sequester, although that's not technically quite accurate, but it's sort of known as that. That set budget caps from here until 2021 at least. So we're working on those caps now. Now, what has happened with those caps they represent significant reductions in discretionary spending, and both for defense and for non-defense programs like this one. Now, what's happened the last 4 years is Congress has said, you know what, these caps, we can't really work with these caps. We'll have a hard time passing bills that are, you know, down to the level of spending set by these caps. So we're gonna do a deal. We're gonna do a new budget deal, and we're gonna raise the caps. And that's happened twice in the last 4 years for 2 years at a time each time. That has not happened yet for this upcoming fiscal year, for fiscal year 18. Everyone expects that at some point that will happen, and if and when and for a number of reasons. I mean, a lot of Republicans, on the one hand, want increased money for defense, and a lot of Democrats, although this is certainly not pure on either side, a lot of Democrats want increased money for non-defense programs. So put all those forces together, and and the fact that Senate Democrats can still hold up the process through a filibuster, you have all the makings for doing another budget deal at some point in time. And at this point, I think most people expect that to happen. So when that does happen, if it's like what would likely happen is the caps will go up for a certain amount of it, and the caps are divided between defense and non-defense. So defense will go up a certain amount, and if the Democrats have their way, that means anything non-defense will go up by the same amount as well. So very long way of saying that all the things that are happening now in terms of the funding bills will at some point likely have to be revised with larger amounts of money available to each of the appropriation subcommittees to work with. How will that play out for ATE and EHR? I don't know. Like I said, the House already in their bill level funds EHR, and I don't know whether you'd really see it going beyond that level. But and so there are cuts to other parts of that bill. I think notably the Justice Department took a fair amount of cuts, and other parts of that bill took other cuts, well beyond anything that the NSF took. Although, like I said, that the NSF was down a little bit too. The Senate, they did make a cut to EHR. So if the Senate committee had more money to work with, that might be one of the things they do. Is say, all right, we're not going to take an $18 million cut to EHR. We're going to bring it up to $880 million. So all that relieves the pressure of any potential cuts in any given program. And so first and foremost, when we as advocates for community colleges in general, we are urging Congress to in fact do a budget deal and raise those spending caps so there's more money available for all our key programs, including the NSF. And I know I've been talking a lot about making sure that that funding is maintained for the program. It's been at the same level now for at least 3 years, I think. It went up $2 million 3-4 years ago. But it's been at basically the same level, either 64, 66 million, for quite some time now. So obviously, given any opportunity, we would love to go beyond level funding for the program and increase that funding. So these are all in terms of advocating for that in your meetings, in terms of putting more resources into the AT program. It is somewhat important to know kind of the general process that Congress is working through in terms of their funding legislation overall. I'm just pausing 1 second. Do we have any questions about that? Do we have any draft language for AT we should share? We don't have a specific draft language right now. Well, I'm happy to get something out to you. We will on the next slide talk a little bit about some of the points you want to cover. I mean, I think really the most important thing about ATE and advocating for its funding, when you're in your office with your member and their staff, and talking about the impacts of the program. I mean, like we said before, their interest is going to be primarily about how the program is affecting their constituencies. and that's going to be the thing that gets their support for the program. So I wouldn't worry too much about having any specific, crafted message about ATE funding. I think your message is really going to be, here's what this program is doing in your district. We'd love to have your support for increased, for at least level funding or increased funding for the ATE program. And again, depending on where they sit, whether they are an appropriator themselves or on the science committee, or maybe someone a little bit more removed from the direct workings of the program, you just want to urge them to do what they have to do to make that support known for increased funding for the program. But again, your main message is really going to be about the particulars of the good things that the ATE is doing in their backyard. And then the report language that references ATE, I'm happy to send out some links. Again, it is the if you go to congress.gov, and right on the front page there'll be a link on there that says appropriations, and you just want to scroll to the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill. And there'll be like a chart or a table basically on that appropriations page, and they'll all just be listed out alphabetically. Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill. There'll be links to the House report and the Senate report, and that's where they are basically. Happy to follow some links, but that's basically the process you're going to go to find those, and then they'll just be large PDF documents that pop up, and just do a search on education and human resources, and it'll take you right to where you need to be. Again, it's just one line in those reports that say, like I said before, NSF should fund ATE at least the level that they were funded last year. Another question, is it helpful to share aggregate impact data with them, not just statewide? Yes, I mean, I would start with the localized impact and statewide impact. That's where I would put most of my focus. But it's certainly never a bad thing to talk about that aggregate impact as well. And again, as we said before, you do want to come in with a mixture of that good data that you have, as well as a couple of those good stories that you have too, as well, about your program, and and possibly even having a student with you in person. But no, I see no problem with talking about that aggregate impact. But again, I would emphasize and start with that more localized impact. Yeah, and data from the Evaluate publication and the Impact publications. That's great stuff to share. You can even offer to share the entire publication with them. But good data to share, localized data will be the most effective and important. All right, so last slide, just in terms of a couple other of the things I suggest you kind of work into your conversations. But as we've been talking about throughout, you just really want to strongly relate how your ATE project center, or whatever it is, the case may be, how that's impacting your community, state, and the country. So, and I think in that order. Obviously it depends on who you're meeting with. If you're in a senator's office, you're going to be talking statewide. But if your representative's office, to the extent that you have district-specific or something close to district-specific information, that's you want to focus on that as well. And it's just mentioned that aggregate nationwide data is good stuff as too. I think, as we often do, I mean, obviously a lot of what you're doing, if not all, in some way or another through the ATE program and STEM education in general, is a real popular topic up in Congress is workforce development and the roles that your projects play in that, exactly what they're doing. I would say in general that community colleges, I think it's fairly safe to say, are one of, or perhaps the most popular sector of higher education, with members of Congress across the spectrum, largely because we are seen as the institutions that are really addressing the needs of the workforce. And certainly other institutions are doing it. You know, four-year institutions of all stripes they're all doing this. But I think community colleges are seen as institutions that are really have this at their core of their mission in terms of their workforce development mission. And to the extent that that's different than some of the other things about higher education in general that are perhaps not as popular with people up on the Hill, I think you know, perhaps especially we just saw a poll recently about that came out about how certain people view higher education and higher education in general, and some aspects of it are not as popular these days. I think you know, particularly with conservative members of Congress and conservatives in general. But a lot of that is not associated with community colleges by people up on the Hill. So we do enjoy, you know, a bit of an advantage because of that, and again, that's because of what is seen as our, you know, the fact that we are really dealing head-on with the issues of workforce development, and of course that leads to you want to definitely stress how what you are doing, either, you know, generally at your institution and specifically through your program or center, how does that lead to jobs, jobs, jobs? Obviously a huge focus. It was a huge issue in the presidential election, and it's something that's still very much on people's minds. Now, I don't want to say that and say that should be the only thing that, you know, you should be focused on, but that should be something that, you know, really is kind of comes up to the forefront when talking about what you're doing, either how you're directly, you know, educating or training people for jobs, or providing them with the tools and education necessary to go on to various careers, whatever the case may be in terms of the particulars of your project or your center, and I know centers, you know, do any and all of the above that. Whatever the particulars may be, how does that feed into helping people either, you know, find good work, whatever the case may be, how that feeds people into the STEM workforce in your area. I think, you know, but beyond that, like I said a couple minutes ago, really your role up there, when you go up there, is to be an educator. You're going to want to go up and just educate a member of Congress and their staff about what you're doing, the impact that it's having in their districts and states, and they're going to, you know, to a large extent, they're going to know what to do with that information. But you do want to make some points about, and these are the kind of things that we're able to do with the funding that goes into this program, and this is why this program is important and it deserves your support. But again, most of that's going to be done just by showing them, you know, the impact it's having in their areas. So that's and you know, I promised at the beginning. So these are the contact information from everyone in our department. David Boehm is our senior VP. Who heads up our operations here. David and I are the two lobbyists in our department, so we're the folks that go up on the Hill, and Lori helps out with various aspects of our department, and Yolanta, or JJ as she goes by, is a researcher that's housed within the government relations department here. We also have a research department, but JJ is in particular our public advocacy researcher. So that's what I got for you today. Looks like we still got about up to 15 minutes left or so for any further questions you all have. So fire away if there's anything else you wanna ask about.
Thanks, Jim. This is Ellen. So as Jim said, if anyone has additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll take a moment to see if we have a few more questions. And then before we let everyone go, we do have just a brief survey at the end, but there seems to be some questions coming in right now. How do we get a copy of the slides? We will be sending out an email with a link to the PDF of the slides, as well as a link to access the recording. And so, Jim, we're getting some nice thanks to you, and I add my thanks for your time this afternoon and for all of you for joining us. I think what we'll do is we'll take just a few more seconds here and see if we have any additional questions. Said, would AACC be interested in putting together a group of ATE projects meeting with the STEM subcommittee?
Yeah.
So, Jim, I direct that to you.
That's actually a very good idea. I think Ellen and I will knock heads about that and see what we can come up with. But I think that's a great suggestion. The other thing that, as I said at the outset, in terms of this opportunity, and hopefully if nothing else that you've gotten out of the presentation today, is that this is not a mysterious process. There's nothing, if you've never done this before in terms of meeting with folks up on Capitol Hill, it is not in any way scary or anything like that. It's kind of business as usual. And again, and if anything, you all are in a better position than I am, because I'm just one of the people here in the swamp. You are the constituents, so you're in an even better position in terms of getting that meeting and having a productive meeting with your member of Congress. So I really do urge you to take advantage of the opportunity and get up there and spread the word about the ATE program up on the Hill while you're here.
Great. Thank you, Jim. So it looks like we have a lot of thanks in the chat box, and we thank all of you for doing this. Jim and I will be following up over email, particularly as we get closer to the conference, see if there are ways we can assist you in setting up these visits. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and close the webinar and ask for the survey to come up. Thank you, Janet. Thanks to Mike for setting this up for us. And again, thank you, Jim, for presenting and sharing all this information. We wish everyone a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you in October.
Thanks, everyone.